This lesson is about what is ATP. ATP is the energy currency of the cell. Many of the reactions occur in living cells and require energy to be added, such as contracting your muscle fibers, making proteins, making DNA, etc. And the energy comes in the form of ATP, which is the cell's energy, biological energy. ATP consists of a number of different parts. You can see on the screen here, we have adenine, that's a nitrogenous base. We have ribose, that's our sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. So in this lesson, we're going to concentrate on these 3 phosphate groups because this is where we're getting our energy from. So ATP contains a lot of free energy, and then what happens, I'll just go back here, these 3 phosphates have a lot of electrons and they repulse each other, causing some crowding, and it's really easy to break the bonds between these phosphates. And so when you break the bonds, you can release some energy, which can then be used for other things. So if we look at this picture is about, okay, here's your ATP. Let's concentrate on these 3 phosphate groups. If you add some water, then you can actually cut the bond between these 2 phosphates and this third one. So when we add the water in, you can see that 1 hydrogen is released and associates over here, and the other OH comes and is here. We refer to this later as inorganic phosphate. And the big deal is that you get a lot of energy out of this. This other molecule that's left over is now called ADP, adenosine diphosphate, because there's 2 phosphates, instead of ATP, where there are 3 phosphates. So this is just what we saw before in picture form. The amount of energy that's released is negative 30.5 kilojoules per mole. So there's some energy released rather than energy taken in. So when bonds in a reaction break and new bonds form, then sometimes an overall net energy is negative. That means the energy is then released. So it's a different meaning than in math when you owe something or whatever. Okay, so here's the topic of energy, ATP and energy coupling. So there's an enzyme that can take the ATP and another molecule and bring them close together. And once you do that, you can actually attach a phosphate group onto the other molecule. This is called phosphorylation. So if you have something that's an endergonic reaction, it's a reaction that requires energy and it won't happen by itself. It's not spontaneous. So what you can do is you can throw some phosphate at the situation and then it can then move along. So if you had like a very sleepy student and they're just like sleeping on their desk, I can throw some candy at them, they can eat it and gain energy to do what they need to do. So the result of this anyways is the molecule gains free energy and becomes more reactive because it now has the energy to keep going. So much of the work of the cell is dependent on phosphorylation for energy. This idea of taking a phosphate and putting it onto a reactant molecule. So here's an example of ATP and energy coupling. So this is something called glutamic acid. And if we add ammonia to it, this is now called glutamine, which is an amino acid. This is showing the reaction happening without ATP. So you can see the Gibbs free energy is positive. That means that this is a reaction that requires energy and it won't just happen spontaneously. It's just like if you have a match will just sit there. You have to give it some energy in order for it to go. All right. Let's see what happens if the ATP is if the phosphorylation happens. So the idea is that you're going to couple with ATP to give it energy. So in this first reaction, we have glutamine again, and then there's ATP, and then what happens is one of the phosphates is moved over to the glutamine. That'll give us glutamyl phosphate, so this is phosphorylation. And what we have after that is ADP, because what's left is 2 phosphoruses instead of 3. This reaction is less than 0, meaning that it releases energy. Now, if we go to the second reaction, we now have the glutamyl phosphate, and then reacting it with ammonia gives you whatever this is called. What I don't remember what this is called. I don't know. This molecule, and then inorganic phosphate. So you can see in the second part of the reaction that this phosphorylation is reversed. It's taken off. This is also a negative Gibbs energy, meaning that it will release energy. Okay, so this is it again, just bigger. Okay, so let's look at the overall reaction. We have our glutamine and our ammonia giving us glutamine. This is a reaction that's positive amount of energy. That means it needs energy to proceed. It will not proceed spontaneously. Then if we take this reaction of ATP and then we cut off one of the phosphates, then this can move over to here. And anyways, this reaction is overall negative. And if we add these all together, then overall we have something that's going to release energy and occur spontaneously. So this is ATP and energy coupling.